Well, the straits have to be open. They're going to be open one way or the other. So they need to be open. What's happening there is unlawful. It's illegal. It's unsustainable for the world. It's unacceptable. The president had a very important, I think, historic call just a couple days ago with a number of leaders from the region. I think there's strong alignment and agreement on what a preliminary draft should look like. I think that, like anything with something like this, and it's going to take a couple days to settle on, even down to the disagreements over a word, a sentence. It's either going to be a good deal or there isn't going to be one.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio with the latest on the U.S. strikes on Iranian targets overnight. The U.S. conducted defensive strikes Monday. First, the U.S. sank 2 ships CENTCOM said were laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran responded by launching missiles at U.S. planes, prompting a return. The U.S. attacked a missile site in southern Iran. A CENTCOM spokesperson said, quote, U.S. Central Command continues to defend our forces while using restraint during the ongoing ceasefire. President Trump, meanwhile, earlier on Sunday, said that negotiations were proceeding nicely, proposing that Iran and other Middle Eastern countries join the historic Abraham Accords if a peace deal is made. The president vowed that all enriched uranium would be destroyed. Now Iran is threatening to retaliate once again. It claims the U.S. violated the ceasefire. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. How do you assess this most recent reaction from the United States?
Well, that's the appropriate reaction, certainly. I mean, here's the Iranians supposedly sitting down at the table to negotiate removing the controls over the Straits of Hormuz and trying to make a deal so that we're not going to re-attack them, an option that I preferred, certainly to finish off Iran and weaken them so that there would be an economic collapse, and hopefully the Iranian people will be able to deal with that. But that's not where we are. Let's deal with where we are. The Iranians once again showing their hands here. I mean, what they were doing is laying mines in a place where they had already laid some mines, and they were thickening that capability to deny that lane to obviously transit capability of the oil tankers. And as soon as that operation began, our guys had enough sense of what was really taking place. We interfered with it. They fired at us, and then we went after the source of where those missiles came from, those SAM missiles came from in the vicinity of Bandar Abbas. The CENTCOM commander has the full authority to react defensively. He doesn't have to ask permission. That's what was done. He had the full support of his chain of command, the Secretary of War and the President of the United States, to do that. But I think the lesson here is we're already Iranians. And I think in going forward here, Maria, we've got to be clear-eyed about who we're dealing with. Let's put in the rearview mirror all the other options. We're on a path here to get a negotiated settlement. So how do we get at that and do that as best we possibly can? One, we have to recognize that Iran is going to feel emboldened. They believe they got the United States, the world's #1 superpower, to back down here. And we're going into the negotiation phase. They know they were hurt seriously by the 37 days of military operations, and they were trying to avoid any more of that. So that has been accomplished. And being emboldened, how does that translate? Here's number one. What they will try to do is, certainly the Straits of Hormuz will likely be open, but they want to maintain control over that. They want to have sovereignty over it. They're claiming that Oman and Iran, these are territorial waters, and therefore they have a right to it. They're ignoring that the UAE also borders the Straits. And that's not, there's no legal basis for that. International law recognizes this as international waterways, and we've got to hold to that. They have now said, well, we're not going to charge transit fees. We'll charge protection fees. Protection from what? Protection from Iranian attack? Doesn't that sound like an organized crime deal that we used to face in this country? That's what these guys are truly about. So what do we have to do here? We have to make certain, and we have leverage here. Our leverage is the economic blockade. We have to make certain that they make public declarations and written statements in the agreement that they are going to respect and are committed to international trafficking through the Straits, and there's a legal basis for that. and we cannot have them holding a geopolitical influence over the region. The major achievement Iran will see in everything that's taken place since hostilities broke out is the fact that they took control of the Straits of Hormuz, and they believe they will have influence over our Gulf state allies and partners in the region going forward. We didn't take it away from them physically. We have to take it away from them publicly in terms of the deal we make. The second thing they're going to do is string these negotiations out. We've given them 60 days. They'll probably take as much of that as possible. Yes, they'll say we want to make a deal, but at the same time, when you get down to the details, they're going to fight us over those details. They believe that the leverage that the United States has is certainly a real one. We have leverage over their money. They want their frozen assets released. They want sanctions removed. We have got to use that as leverage. The other leverage, we're saying, well, we'll reattack if you don't do that. I think where they are, they don't take it seriously because they'll stretch this thing out. The closer we get to the midterms, they believe the less likely the United States would ever attack them. So the real leverage here is money. And we've got to use that money to help get the best deal we possibly can. We can't give in to their negotiations. They're going to want some good faith on our part. Okay, release some billions of dollars to us. I think the Qataris were talking about, because they have control of some frozen assets, some $6 billion. That'd be a mistake. We cannot throw that kind of a lifeline to the regime before we get down to the nitty-gritty of the deal, which is what? Nuclear weapons, support for proxies, and ballistic missiles. And those are the things they're going to try to drag out here as much as they possibly can.
So General,
yes,
I mean,
we still have some leverage points here to use.
You think that we're just going to continue to grind them down and just use the economic power and the economic warfare and the money to continue to weaken them until they just submit?
I don't believe they're going to submit, to be frank, given you posited the question. I think where they're at right now, they know they have serious issues based on the 37-day war that we conducted against them. But the regime is intact. The hardliners are in control. They're all about recovery now. And they want to, I'm sure inside their circles, they haven't changed their goals one bit. They still want to be a nuclear power at some point. They're going to deny they're interested in it. They want to try to recover their ballistic missile programs. Certainly they were doing all of that over the last 6 weeks of the ceasefire. And they were continuing to support the proxies financially over the last 6 weeks. So that they're going to attempt to return to all of that. We got to put together a deal that stops them from doing that. The leverage of reattack, I don't think, is anywhere near as strong as it once was. So what is our leverage then? Initially, what I said over the Straits of Hormuz to get our right answer is the blockade. Then it's also going forward is the financing and the recovery. They can't recover without some additional financing. Once the straits are open, obviously their oil, people are buying it. The Chinese are going to go back to buying 90% of it. That's a revenue source that we can't stop. But the other things that we can, in terms of getting them flush with billions of dollars, we're not going to make the mistake that the Obama administration did. I mean, that's absurd, giving them billions of dollars up front and just sign a good faith. President Trump is not going to make a bad deal here. He's our backstop. So we got to be tough about it. We don't have as strong a leverage, and we got to be honest with ourselves about that. But we still have leverage here, and we've got to use it.
Well, it sounds like the war is very much still on, and if we're not expecting them to submit and to give in here, we just have to keep grinding them down.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And listen, they are, you talk about an art form, their art of negotiations is solid. I mean, they drag out negotiations. They promise, and then when they get down to the details, they fight us over the details, and they drag out negotiations. And we keep going around in circles. We've been talking about the same issues, as we all know, Maria, for months. And this circular piece we're involved in here this is the objective of what the Iranians want to do. They want to drag this thing out as close to the midterms as possible. Look, at the 60 days gets us to where? Late July. and that's about less than 90 days to the midterms then. They believe that the likelihood of any reattack taking place at that point is pretty slim. And they figure the longer they can drag out negotiations, they can wear us down in that negotiation process. However, that is not going to happen. The president's committed to this diplomatic path versus the military path. But at the end of the day, despite the length of the negotiations, he is not going to make a deal that's going to compromise the United States' interest in the region or that of our allies.
I mean, the question that many people keep asking, General, is will President Trump finish the job?
Well, he passed up the opportunity to do it militarily. He's trying to achieve that diplomatically now. He can't do that without cooperation with the Iranians. I think at the end of the day, where the Iranians would like to have this is they negotiate as long as they possibly can, even past the 60, 90 days. And even if they do come to an agreement, they're not going to fulfill that agreement, particularly in the next administration. They'll go back to doing everything that they want to achieve.
Unbelievable. All right, General, great analysis as usual. We so appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great talking, Maria. Thank you.
General Jack Keane. Stay with us. We'll be right back.